Good afternoon, English 105 students. So today I'm going to go over your first assignment, part 1, part 2, and part 3. So in week 2, you're going to be doing part 1 of your reader response essay. So in the first part of your reader response essay, you're simply going to answer the questions about what is this paper about, what is the purpose of this paper, why are you using this annotated bibliography. And so you're writing something similar to a literature review for the first page of your assignment. So you're going to write about, well, this paper is going to be about X, Y, and Z, and then you're going to write a short, like an abstract or literature review of your reader response essay for the first page. And then after that, then you're going to write your annotated bibliography. And so for the first assignment, you're going to find 4 credible sources, basically. You're going to find 4 credible sources, and they don't have to be peer-reviewed yet for the first part. And so in order to find a credible source, as I went over in this week's forum, you use KAPOW. So C stands for currency. So you make sure that the article is less than 10 years old. A stands for author. Make sure that the author is an expert in the field. P stands for purpose. You make sure that the article is not an advertisement, because we know that in advertisements like to exaggerate the truth. O stands for objectivity. It means that both sides of an issue, that means the article talks about both sides of an issue and that it's neutral. W, writing style. You make sure that the writing style is professional and that it has a thesis, no grammar mistakes. So that's how you use KAPOW to come up with credible sources. Then that's part 1. Okay, so part 1 is the literature review and 4 credible sources. So that's due in week 2. So that's your week 2 assignment. Then in week 3, part 2, you are going to also have your literature review, but this time you're also going to include 2 peer-reviewed sources. So peer-reviewed source is the most reliable source that you can find for a paper, because in a peer-reviewed source, other experts have looked over that article and deemed it worthy to be published in an academic journal. Unworthy articles are then thrown out and then not published in an academic journal. So that's why the peer-reviewed articles are very reliable. And so therefore, how do you find a peer-reviewed article? Well, you definitely don't go to Wikipedia. You go to Google Scholar. Google Scholar, anything on Google Scholar are scholarly sources. And so I will go over the difference between a scholarly source and a popular source in a different video. But for the purposes of part 2, so you can find credible sources, you can find credible sources and peer-reviewed sources at Google Scholar and at your college online library, LAPU online library. Any of the databases in that library will have peer-reviewed and credible sources. But when you go to the library, you have a drop-down menu, and then the drop-down menu will ask you what kind of sources you want, and you're going to check peer-reviewed sources. Then that way, only the peer-reviewed sources will show up in your hits. And so there is a video inside your week 4 shell which talks about, and your week 3 and 2 shell as well. I'll put it in your announcements. That tells you how to find peer-reviewed articles in your LAPU library. So part 2, the only difference with part 2 and part 1 is that part 2, you're going to find me 2 peer-reviewed articles. You're going to summarize those peer-reviewed articles just like you did the credible sources in part 1. Then in part 3, week 4, you're going to put all of this together. You're going to put all of the credible sources as well as the peer-reviewed sources all together in your annotated bibliography in alphabetical order, and then left-hanging indent, double-spaced. If you don't know how to do a left-hanging indent, you can go to YouTube and then put into the search engine left-hanging indent. And the left-hanging indent is done within your Microsoft Word document, Microsoft Word program. So there's so many ways in which you can get that done. So your first assignment will finish in week 4. So by the time you hit week 4, you will have done part 1, part 2, and part 3 of this first reader response essay assignment. If you are missing any assignments, focus on getting your part 1, part 2, and part 3 assignments done first, as these assignments count more than your discussion forums. So that pretty much ends, and basically you would also have to have a word count of 750 words to 1,500 words for the first page, where you write your literature review and abstract, where you talk about what your paper is going to be about. And then you need to cite your sources. If you're citing any kind of numbers, you need to cite the source. If you're citing a direct quote where you say verbatim what the author says, then you need quotation marks, then you need author, date, and page number. And then even if you're paraphrasing something, you still have, even if you're paraphrasing the source, you still need to cite your source. You don't need quotation marks for a paraphrase quote, but you do need to have the author's name and the date. So that pretty much sums up part 1, part 2, and part 3 for your reader response essay first assignment for English 105 for weeks 1 through 4. Then weeks 5 through 8, you're going to be working on your argumentative essay. So that's a different essay and a different video. So if you have any questions, you can always email me anytime. So here I am going to end this particular recording, and I hope that you find it fun to do your literature review and your annotated bibliography. You're going to learn a lot of APA out of this. And so this is Professor H signing off.